Ever since Ukraine demonstrated that unmanned vehicles could not only be effective in its war against Russia, but could also be the most important weapon in the entire conflict, there has been a race to develop new and more innovative types of drones. Ukraine has demonstrated mastery in the skies with drones, and it's now achieving similar success on the seas, but it's also been building ground robots. And those ground-based drones are transforming from logistical assets to offensive nightmares for which Russia has no answer. It's the rise of the ground robots as Ukraine pulls off the impossible with a historic first frontline kill. Defense Express provides the basic details in a December 10th article in which it explains that Ukraine carried out what it calls a milestone special operation. That operation saw Ukraine deploy a ground robot to directly confront a Russian armored vehicle as it attempted to support an assault against Ukraine's defenses. The vehicle in question was an MTLB armored personnel carrier, which is a Soviet-era relic that's still widely used throughout the Russian military. Army recognition says there are more than 80 variants of this particular vehicle, meaning Russia has tweaked it constantly since it was designed during the 1960s. There are also 1,493 MTLBs still in service, the outlet reports. Capable of carrying up to 11 soldiers, the MTLB is equipped with a machine gun turret used to take out small threats on its route, and has an all-welded steel armored hull designed to protect the crew from small arms fire and shrapnel. With a range of 500 kilometers or around 310 miles and a top speed of 62 kilometers or 38.5 miles per hour, it's far from the most impressive armored vehicle in Russia's arsenal, but it's still widely used. And if left to go about its business, it's a great vehicle for transporting troops to assault positions. Ukraine needed to do something about the incoming MTLB, and it was soldiers of the country's 5th Separate Assault Brigade that came up with an interesting idea. Rather than shelling the vehicle on its approach or deploying FPV drones to destroy it with kamikaze raids, the brigade decided to deploy a next-generation response that showcases how Ukraine has once again changed the game on the unmanned vehicle front. A ground robot was sent into battle, and the 5th Separate Assault Brigade explained what happened next in a Telegram post. At night, the enemy prepared to storm the positions of the 5th Assault Brigade. Our crews brought into operation Droid ground combat platforms equipped with a heavy machine gun, the brigade states in its social media post. One of the operators spotted through a thermal imager an MTLB carrying infantry moving directly into the kill zone. The 12.7mm machine gun fire pierced the side of the vehicle, hitting the crew and assault troops on board. The description of events was published alongside footage of the incident, demonstrating that Ukraine isn't making any of this up to make its ground robots seem more dangerous than they are. The robot was deployed, and by taking out an MTLB, it completed a world-first kill in combat. After Ukraine's drone had ripped through the MTLB with machine gun fire, likely killing or injuring the crew and assault troops on board, the vehicle spun out of control. It veered toward its own soldiers before passing with mere inches of the very ground robot that caused the damage. The robot appears to have followed up its initial volley of fire with more targeted strikes on the armored vehicle's rear, eventually bringing it to a complete stop. As impressive as all of this already is, what's even more astounding is that this operation wasn't carried out against an MTLB that was operating in isolation. Russia's armored vehicle was just one part of an active assault against a Ukrainian position, meaning the ground robot's operators had to navigate a full assault team to reach their target. Once the MTLB was taken out, Russia's attempted assault collapsed. Ukraine lost no soldiers. The operator driving the ground robot pulled off all of this from a safe distance away. 5th Assault continues integrating cutting-edge technology and rewriting the rules of modern warfare, the brigade declared in the wake of its world-first frontline kill. And it's not wrong. The brigade has just proven the viability of a brand new type of unmanned weapon that Ukraine can use to stop Russia's mechanized assaults in their tracks. But we'll come back to that point a little later in the video. One of the more interesting things about what Ukraine just achieved is that the 5th Separate Assault Brigade actually had an unintended practice run for this special operation just days earlier. On November 30th, United 24 media reported that the brigade had deployed one of its ground robots in a field test, presumably to determine how effective it could be as an offensive force against Russia's armored vehicles. Russia was supposed to be nowhere in sight during this test. However, as the outlet reports, Ukraine's robot came across an MTLB unexpectedly during the field test. Coming practically face-to-face with Russia's armored vehicle, the ground robot opened fire with a Browning M2 heavy machine gun from point-blank range. United 24 media says that reports of what happened next are thin on the ground, though it appears that the machine gun fire managed to penetrate the MTLB's hull during this unexpected encounter. The lack of a follow-up report suggests that Russia's armored personnel carrier managed to get away. But Ukraine had a proof of concept thanks to this encounter. A little over a week later, it deployed one of its ground robots with the specific purpose of destroying an MTLB, and it claimed the scalp that it was looking for. We also know a little about the robot that the 5th Separate Assault Brigade deployed during this historic encounter. According to Defense Express, the robot is developed by a company called DevDroid, which is participating in Ukraine's Brave One program. Brave One is a government-backed project that launched in 2023, and it essentially serves as an innovation hub for Ukraine's drone developers. United 24 Media says that the program provides a platform upon which drone developers can showcase their latest products and gain feedback from soldiers who advise on how those products can be tweaked to make them more effective on the battlefield. Participants often receive grants ranging from $12,000 to $200,000, and they become part of a network of manufacturers who all have the same goal: developing unmanned systems that Ukraine can use to win the war against Russia. It's a clever program designed to unite the many brilliant technological minds in Ukraine, offering them ways to gather ideas and get quick feedback about the viability of their products. For Ukraine itself, Brave One serves as a pipeline of new defense products into which it can invest whenever one of those products proves itself on the battlefield. DevDroid's ground robot just did that, and then some, and it appears that the clever idea of equipping the drone with a remotely operated weapon station, fitted with the type of Browning machine gun we mentioned earlier, is the key to its success. That station allows the Ukrainian drone operator to control the drone and its gun independently, allowing for precise engagements with enemy targets by Ukrainian soldiers who are well outside the range of direct fire. Ukraine has made and deployed plenty of ground robots before, but the DevDroid robot is different. Unlike almost any other ground drone that has come before, this robot carries an offensive threat that makes it a clear issue for Russia's armored units. Defense Express explains one of the reasons why this new form of offense is so important to Ukraine, stating, "This operation represents the first confirmed instance of Ukrainian ground robot destroying Russian armored equipment in combat. While Ukraine has widely adopted drones in the air domain, the successful use of a combat-capable ground platform signals a new level of technological adaptation on the battlefield." That brings us nicely to our next topic. What does the world-first kill of an armored vehicle by a ground robot mean for the future of the Ukraine war? Before we start answering that question, it's important to note that Ukraine can't get too far ahead of itself when it comes to what it's just achieved. It's extremely impressive that its DevDroid robot just took out an armored vehicle, but this is only the first instance of that happening. Ukraine will need to repeat the feat several times over to fully establish that its ground robots have become viable offensive assets that can be deployed across the entire front line. But let's assume for a moment that Ukraine does just that. The DevDroid robot and any others that offer similar capabilities become established as weapons that Ukraine can use. First, and as Defense Express points out, the emergence of such drones as offensive assets grants Ukraine renewed resilience across the front lines. There are several ways, including offering frontline units immense flexibility in terms of how they respond to Russian assaults. Rather than having to plot out manned defenses and counter-assaults, Ukraine could quickly deploy its ground robots to confront the threat as soon as it arises. Those robots don't even need to be 100% successful in destroying Russia's armor. It's enough that they can do some damage, as we saw with the MTLB kill, as the loss of even one piece of armor makes a Russian assault far less effective than it could otherwise be. Ukraine is getting its hands on a force multiplier that will come into its own during defensive engagements, and the most important thing about that multiplier is simple: it doesn't place more Ukrainian soldiers at risk. Instead, this new generation of robots does the exact opposite, as they allow Ukraine to defend against Russian assaults without sending as many soldiers into the fight as it has in the past. This is a similar benefit to that provided by Ukraine's aerial drones, and it means that Ukraine may be taking another step closer to replacing its frontline soldiers with a robot army that is operated from miles behind the combat lines. Ukraine is in dire need of these types of solutions, as the country's army is struggling with a manpower crisis that threatens to weaken its collective defense against Russia. Several outlets have highlighted this crisis, with some even proclaiming that the reason that Pokrovsk is on the brink of being captured is that Ukraine doesn't have enough soldiers to man the city's defenses. The Atlantic Council is one of those outlets, as it points out that Ukraine is outnumbered 8 soldiers to 1 on that particular front. After 3.5 years of heroic and exceptionally bloody resistance, the fear is that Ukraine may now be approaching the point when the country no longer has enough fighters to effectively defend the full length of the front lines in Europe's largest war since World War II, the Council states. It also says that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky may need to make some major changes to have a chance of overcoming this problem. One of those changes could be the lowering of the age of Ukraine's compulsory military service from 25 to 18, which would deliver an influx of young soldiers into the Ukrainian military. Zelensky appears to have avoided doing this thus far because it would be politically dangerous for him to do so. Drafting the young into the war would provide a much-needed manpower boost, but it also risks creating resentment among a generation that will be voting the next time that Ukraine is able to hold elections. Zelensky has also eased travel restrictions placed on Ukrainian men between the ages of 18 and 22, which appears to have been a bad move from a military manpower perspective. The Daily Telegraph reports that nearly 100,000 Ukrainian men left their country within 2 months of those restrictions being eased, which raises the issue of Ukraine having fewer potential soldiers to draw from, even if Zelensky does lower the compulsory military service age. The Financial Times expanded on these issues in a November 11th article, in which it revealed that Ukraine only has an average of between 4 and 7 soldiers guarding each kilometer of the front lines. Desertions have also become a problem, with October alone bringing 20,000 cases of either flat-out desertion or soldiers going absent without leave. That was the highest monthly figure for all of 2025, and it shows that nearly 4 years of brutal fighting against Russia is now taking its toll on Ukraine's soldiers. No less than former heavyweight boxing champion and current mayor of Kyiv, Vladimir Klitschko, has commented on what he calls Ukraine's huge problems finding soldiers. According to a November 12th Politico report, Klitschko spoke to the Alex Springer Global Reporters Network, stating, "We have huge problems with soldiers, with human resources." He also emphasized that Ukraine's forces aren't lacking in courage, but the relentless bombardments being carried out by Russia are causing challenges. "They have an order, and they advance," Klitschko said of the Russian troops. "We've defended our country successfully for almost 4 years, but it's difficult. The courage to fight is still there, and that matters greatly." Ukraine has a clear manpower issue. The emergence of DevDroid's ground robot as an offensive force has come just at the right time to play a role in fixing that problem. As far back as April, Forbes senior contributor David Hambling was reported on what appeared to be a Ukrainian attempt to replace as many of its human soldiers as it could with a robot army. His report was published at a time when Ukrainian officials had stated their intention to field 15,000 ground robots in 2025 alone, which represented a massive scaling up of the number that Ukraine had fielded in the past. However, he also noted that building these types of robots and actually deploying them are two very different challenges, with the latter presenting a serious problem. Hambling quotes Katerina Bondar, who is a fellow at Wadhwani AI Center, that is part of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. "Imagine bringing a 1,000-kilogram machine to the front line," Bondar points out. "It's a logistics issue. If it runs on fuel, you have to transport that as well. If it runs on batteries, they will be big and heavy and require generators to recharge. There is a cost to replacing soldiers with robots, and that's before accounting for the monetary cost of the robots and their munitions. Still, these are all costs that Ukraine is increasingly willing to pay, as the alternative is losing more of its active soldiers at a time when youngsters are leaving the country and desertion is reaching new heights. Perhaps this means that robots like DevDroid's unmanned vehicle aren't going to fully replace human troops. But if they can be deployed as effectively as the 5th Separate Assault Brigade managed to deploy them in December, they could do a lot of damage while minimizing the risk presented to Ukraine's frontline soldiers. For Russia, that means a sterner Ukrainian defense to break through, which causes attrition of its own forces and equipment. Beyond this potential for soldier replacement, the DevDroid's robots' exploits also show us that Ukraine's innovative spirit is alive and well. Taking out an armored vehicle with a machine gun mounted on a robot is no easy task, which is why nobody has done it before. But now that technique has been established, we're likely seeing a transformation on the battlefield that could almost be as important as that created by the advent of unmanned aerial vehicles. Ground robots in Ukraine aren't new. How they're being used is, and that's the second way these robots could be a game changer in the war. As recently as November 23rd, the BBC reported on how ground robots have become a lifeline for some of Ukraine's most embattled troops in the Pokrovsk and Mirnorad regions. For those soldiers, these types of robots represent connections to the Ukrainian rear. They deliver food and supplies, with some even being large enough to evacuate wounded soldiers from the front lines. Others are small enough to squeeze through bicycle lanes, look like mini tanks without turrets as they engage in constant supply runs. In this sense, ground robots were already helping with Ukraine's manpower issues by replacing human supply runners. According to the BBC, these types of drones are now responsible for delivering about 90% of the supplies that Ukraine's Pokrovsk defenders receive. Before Ukraine's December exploits, these were the roles that ground robots played in Ukraine. They had become part of the logistical machine. As important as that is, having unmanned vehicles on the ground that are capable of going on the attack could be more so. After all, Ukraine would prefer to use ground robots to stop Russian assaults in their tracks, as it did in December, because that makes everything else that it does safer. Ukraine has been coming up with new ways to use its ground robots over the past few months, An August Business Insider report reveals that these robots are now laying mines, transporting people, and even attacking Russian positions in similar kamikaze strikes conducted by FPV drones. Adding the ability to gun down Russian soldiers and shred armored vehicles with machine gun fire is the latest innovation, and it's one that could change the war. Ukraine knows it. That may be why Ukraine has upped its ground drone requirements. In November, the National Interest reported on comments made by Viktor Pavlov, who is a commander in Ukraine's 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, as well as the founder of a ground robotics school. Pavlov claims that Ukraine should target the deployment of about 30,000 ground robots by 2026, which is double the 15,000 it aimed to deploy in 2025. Some of these robots costing as little as $10,000 per unit to build, though costs will likely be higher for more complex robots. Building 30,000 doesn't seem like an impossible task. However, it is an ambitious goal, and it would test Ukraine's defense industry. Assuming that the test is passed and more robots like DevDroid's offering make their way onto the battlefield, Russia will face some major challenges. Its armored vehicles have already proven far less effective than anticipated during the war. Ukraine's drones, mines, shells, and anti-tank weapons have already led to almost 23,700 armored vehicles being destroyed as of December 10th. Russia has more, and it can replace these losses. However, any additional weapons that Ukraine can use to destroy armored vehicles are weapons that ultimately relieve the pressure that its forces face on the front lines. Ground robots could be that weapon. Ukraine has just proven that they work. Its next task is to build them at scale so they can be deployed across the front lines. As ground robots slowly emerge as the latest weapon that Ukraine can wield against Russia's forces, aerial drones are proving that they can devastate some of Russia's strongest defenses. That's what happened in Crimea during a 2-week-long series of strikes conducted by one of Ukraine's most secretive units. Find out more about how that unit rained hell on Crimea in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more coverage of Ukraine's latest innovations and exploits. And thank you as always for watching.